Hello champions, and welcome to my biology lecture series for 5090 Cambridge O-Level Biology. So today we are going to start chapter number 10, and that is titled as respiration. So very important chapter for your examination, and what I will do is I will particularly pay attention to the textual base, which is number one, introduction to respiration, what the process of respiration is, and then we are actually going to skip the experiments for now for this video. I will what I will do is I will make separate video for the practical work for each chapter, but leaving behind these practical work and the experimental work, I will focus on the text. So first thing that I will talk about is going to be the introduction to respiration. The second thing that I will talk about in today's video is going to be two different types of respiration, that is aerobic respiration. And again, there will be a few experiments which we will leave for now, as I promised that I will make separate video for practical work. Okay, so after aerobic respiration, what I will also then focus on is the another bit of the text, which is section number 3, and this is called aerobic respiration. So we'll talk about respiration, aerobic respiration, and anaerobic respiration. So I'm going to leave the experiments for a separate video. Okay, so let's begin with the introduction. What is respiration? Now, at the very outset, let me tell you that the process of respiration is designed for you to get energy. Now, I'll also be switching every now and then to my whiteboard, because here I will explain you by my funny drawings, right? So we are talking about respiration, guys, right? Now, what happens that our body, the human body, basically works in collaborative framework. So we work in collaboration of different systems. So I'll now draw something very funny here, and please pardon my French drawing, but that is to give you the concept, right? So that's I assume you understand this is the nose and this is the lips of the person. So from the nose, the person is going to get what? Air. And air contains what? Different gases. So air contains oxygen, for example. Air contains nitrogen. Air contains carbon dioxide, some water, and in the form of water vapors, obviously, and a lot of dust particles and bacteria also. But for the purpose of our respiration chapter, we'll focus on oxygen. So that gets into the nasal cavity. Nasal cavity is the place which receives the air, and then it transfers it to this bit, which is known as larynx, right? And this larynx then transfers this air into this windpipe, which is what we call trachea, right? So I'm just giving you the overall broad idea, and then we will start reading the lines of the book, right? So the oxygen then enters into this trachea, and you know that trachea is divided into bronchus, and these bronchi are smaller tubes which enter in the lungs. So you have two lungs, right? One on the right side and one on the left side. And within the lungs, then these bronchi further divide into smaller tubes which are called bronchiole. And at the end of the smallest bronchioles, we have got these balloon-like structures. And what are these balloon-like structures known as? They are known as alveoli. Okay, so that's what we call them, alveoli. So the air which enters into the nose finally reaches here in the alveoli. So if I draw a bigger alveoli, it is something like this, right? So I'm just magnifying this alveoli into this diagram, right? Now, what does it contain? It contains a lot of oxygen because you took it from the air. It also contains nitrogen and carbon dioxide and other things, but they are irrelevant for now because we are interested in oxygen. Okay, so that's how you get oxygen into your lungs. But this oxygen needs to get to the whole body. It needs to get to the whole body. How does that happen? So that's very easy as well. We have another system. We have a heart here in the middle of your chest, and this heart, you know what it's doing? It has different chambers, and you are very well aware of the fact that heart contains right atrium, it contains right ventricle, it contains left atrium and left ventricle. And you also should know from your circulatory chapters that right ventricle has a pulmonary artery which gets blood out of the right ventricle and sends it to the lungs. And basically surrounding the alveoli, these are the capillaries which has the blood coming from the right ventricle. So the right ventricle is sending this blood to the capillary system, which is surrounding the alveoli. Okay. Now what happens here? Here we have inside the capillaries, we have red blood cells, right? And these red blood cells contain what? Hemoglobin. Now this hemoglobin is devoid of oxygen. It does not contain oxygen because it's coming from the right ventricle. And you know that in the right ventricle we have all the blood from different organs coming here, and this is all deoxygenated blood. It does not contain oxygen. So this deoxygenated blood gets into the right ventricle. From the right ventricle it goes to the lungs, and to the lungs it says, hey alveoli, I do not have oxygen, please give me oxygen. And you know what? Lungs have a lot of oxygen. It has a lot of oxygen. From where it gets oxygen? By inspiration, by the process of respiration. It gets a lot of oxygen from the air. And this oxygen, you know the law of diffusion? Because these hemoglobins have very low concentration of oxygen, but the alveoli has high concentration of oxygen. So what happens? This oxygen just diffuses and sits on the top of hemoglobin. Now this is called diffusion. So overall, what's happening? You are taking oxygen from your respiratory system, and then your heart from the right ventricle is sending blood, which contains red blood cells, which contain hemoglobin. This hemoglobin just picks up the oxygen, and then it goes where? It goes back to the left atrium. It goes back to the heart. So it goes, so blood from the right ventricle goes to the lungs, gets the oxygen, and gets back to the left atrium. From the left atrium it goes to the left ventricle, and then from the left ventricle, you know, there is a blood vessel which is known as aorta, and aorta does what? Aorta distributes this blood to the whole body. It goes to kidney, for example, it goes to brain, for example, it goes to muscles, everywhere. And this blood now contains a lot of oxygen because it carried the oxygen from the lungs. So this is such a beautiful system. It's a collaboration between the respiratory system and cardiovascular, circulatory system. So this should be very clear to you. Because now what we have just discussed, that how oxygen is taken into the body and how it is circulated throughout the body to different organs. Okay, it gets circulated to kidney, brain, muscles, bones, everywhere. So heart is the pump. It sends the deoxygenated blood to the lungs. In the lungs, the red blood cells and the hemoglobin gets the oxygen, and this oxygen is then distributed to the whole body. But first it goes to the heart, and heart pumps it to the whole body. Okay, now, so one liner for the whole discussion up till now, that oxygen is distributed to the whole body. This is what we have just discussed. Okay, oxygen is distributed to the whole body, and you know how oxygen gets into the lungs. Lungs say, who is picking up oxygen? It's picked up by hemoglobin, and hemoglobin is then getting back to the left atrium, and then the heart is pumping it to the whole body again. So oxygen is distributed, right? Now we need one more thing to understand respiration, and that thing is number 2, glucose. How is glucose distributed? And we'll get to that in a minute. So this is the oral cavity. This beautiful person also eats food. We eat a lot of protein, fats, carbohydrate, and carbohydrate, you know, in your digestive system is broken down somewhere here. There will be stomach, obviously a little stomach, and then intestine. Pardon my drawing, I'm not a good drawing person, but just to explain you the concepts. So what happens here, that you eat carbohydrate, it's digested into glucose, and where does this glucose go? This glucose, now listen to this very carefully. This glucose is absorbed into the capillaries which are surrounding the intestine. You see, all the organs are surrounded by capillaries. Like alveoli was surrounded by capillaries. Intestine is also surrounded by capillaries. So glucose jumps into the blood here, and after going through the liver, it ultimately gets into the right atrium. From the right atrium it gets into the right ventricle, then it goes to lungs, comes back, left atrium, left ventricle. From the left ventricle it goes to all of your body, be it kidney, be it brain, be it muscle, whatever. So glucose is also distributed. It's also distributed throughout the body. So we have 2 things which are, so up till now I have told you collaboration of 3 organ systems. Respiratory system, where you are getting oxygen into the lungs. digestive system, where you are getting glucose into the blood, and the third one is the circulatory system, which is distributing oxygen as well as glucose. So ultimately the pumping of everything to the whole body organs is done by your heart. So now once we have got oxygen in distributed throughout the body, and we have got glucose distributed throughout the body, let me tell you what happens. This oxygen basically combines with glucose, and this all happens inside the cell. Okay, so imagine that this is the person standing, and this person has got oxygen through the respiratory system, it has got glucose through the digestive system, and the heart has pumped both these things, glucose and oxygen, to all of your body. And now this is your muscle cell. Now inside the muscle cell is available glucose, and inside the muscle cell is available oxygen. Now these will combine together, and what they will produce? They will produce carbon dioxide, they will produce water, and they will produce one very important thing, which is known as ATP. This ATP basically is the other word for energy. You know, in the chapter, once we start this discussion, we will again and again see this word called energy. Energy in the body means ATP. Adenosine triphosphate. Adenosine triphosphate. It's just like this. If you are living in, say for example, Pakistan, the currency that you use to purchase anything is called Pakistani rupees. If you are living in India, it is Indian rupees. If you are living in Bangladesh, it is called taka. If you are in United States of America, it's USA. So every part of the world, they have their own designated currency to do any purchases. If you go to the market, you have to buy something, you need to give them money. Similarly, in the body, if you have to contract your muscles, if you have to walk, for example, if you have to run, for example, if you have to jump, if you have to swim, you have to perform action. And in order to perform any action, you will need energy. And in the body, the currency of energy, the molecule is known as adenosine triphosphate. This contains a lot of energy. It's just like United States dollar. It's just like PKR. It's just like INR. You spend this money and you do the action. So this happens in every cell. And this reaction, gentlemen and ladies, this is known as respiration. So respiration is a process in which oxygen combines with glucose, and it produces carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Okay, so that's the general definition of respiration. Because it contains oxygen, it is also called aerobic respiration, and I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, now let's start discussing this, the first part of the chapter, respiration. So we need to understand what do living organisms use energy for, why do we need energy, and what are the effects of temperature on the respiration in yeast. Well, that's an experiment, and I will skip this in the video. So definition, what is respiration? Is described as the chemical reaction in all the living cells which release energy from glucose. So just like this we discussed, there is glucose and it releases energy, so the reaction is known as respiration. Okay, most of the processes taking place in the cells need energy to make them happen. Now here's a list of examples why we need energy. If you want to contract your muscles, see, when do you contract your muscles? When you are walking, when you are running, you are contracting your muscles. And even if you have eaten something, if you have taken your meal, breakfast, lunch, dinner, your alimentary canal, your digestive system, is contracting. It contains muscles. Because it's contracting, it requires energy. During childbirth, there is a uterus which is pushing the baby out of the body. During childbirth, uterus requires energy. If you are making proteins in your body, any chemical reaction that you are doing, you require energy. If there is process of cell division, you know, we have a lot of cells which divide. So for examples, in the bone marrow, we produce a lot of red blood cells. They keep on dividing. This cell division require energy. The process of active transport, what does that mean? You know, we have cells, and in the cells sometimes we have, you know this process called diffusion. Diffusion is something, if there is a molecule A, which is in higher concentration outside the cell, and it is in lower concentration inside the cell. So 3 molecules here, only 1 molecule here. It will simply go from the area of higher concentration to the area of lower concentration, which means inside the cell, and this is called diffusion. But sometimes what happens, you know, this one molecule despite being in low concentration within the cell, it gets out. So it is moving from the low concentration to the high concentration, and this requires energy. So diffusion does not require energy, but if you are moving against the gradient, then you require energy. It's something like this, so it's easy to understand. So for example, if you are jumping up stairs, if you come down, you don't need much energy. Why? Because you are going towards gravity. But if you go against gravity, if you are climbing stairs up, you need a lot of energy. This is the same thing. If you are going against the gradient from the low concentration to high concentration, you need energy. In order to maintain your body temperature, you need energy. So these are all, your nervous system requires energy all the time to fire impulses. So this is to give you an idea that why energy is required. So let me say this statement. Energy is required by almost every process that a living organism do. Okay, this energy comes from food, because we have glucose in there, and then oxygen combines to, and the process is then called respiration. Now you know this already. I explained this here, that you require oxygen and you require glucose. Okay, so these are the two things you require for respiration. It's a chemical process which takes place inside the cells, and it involves action of a lot of enzymes, obviously. And you should not use the word respiration for breathing. Now listen, these are two different words, right? These are two different words. If we talk about the chemical reaction, this is what we call respiration. But the process of breathing means something different. So understand this word, okay? You know, when you are breathing, what you do is you take the air in. You expand your chest and the air gets in. This process is what we call inspiration, and then you exhale the gas. Obviously you take the gases in and then you take the gases out, and when you expel the gases out, this is called expiration. And the process of air taking in and out, in and out, in and out, they are combined, known as breathing. Okay, it has nothing to do with the chemical reaction. So by breathing, you are just taking air in and expelling air out. This is all breathing is about. But once the cells get the oxygen from the alveoli, once the alveolar oxygen is transported to the hemoglobin of the blood and it gets to the cells and it reaches to that level that when inside the cell this reaction happens, this is what you call respiration. So if it's a chemical reaction, it's respiration. If it's just taking air in and out, in and out, in and out, this is breathing. Okay, now there are many enzymes which are involved, and low temperature slow down the rate of respiration, and in high temperature the respiratory rate goes a little bit. So increase in the temperature speeds up the process of respiration. That's why in fever we have a lot of respiration going on. Consequently, more energy is released through the process of respiration, however above optimum temperature for the enzymes. So we live in a optimum temperature. The body's optimal temperature is, say, for example, 37 degrees, and if it gets above this, it is called hyperthermia, increase in temperature. So the metabolism increases. Okay, so and if it gets like to a very high temperature, say for example 60 degrees, now all the enzymes in the body will be denatured and they will not work. There will be the respiration will stop if the temperature goes very, very high. Okay, it is important in east experiment we are not discussing right now. So I hope that the first part of the video where we had to explain what is respiration is very clear. Okay, respiration is the chemical reaction where glucose is utilized and you produce energy, and energy is equal to ATP. Energy is synonymous to the word ATP. Right, moving forward, the next concept that I have to give you is the aerobic respiration, and that's again a very, very simple concept. Now let me use the whiteboard again and explain the concept to you, and then I will very quickly read the book because then it will be all clear. Now let's draw a very big cell. So suppose this is a cell of your muscle. Okay, and I told you that this cell will receive what? It will receive glucose, right, from the blood. I have already explained this here, that when you eat food, carbohydrate gets digested in the intestine, glucose enters into the blood and it is distributed throughout the body. So this one cell will also receive glucose. Now this glucose gets into a lot of chemical reactions. It is converted into something, for example, glucose 6-phosphate, and then that something is converted into another molecule, another molecule, another molecule, another molecule. Now, this breakdown of glucose into various molecules, now you notice that I'm not telling you the names of these molecules because that's a separate video, and we'll talk about that later. But remember that inside the cell, this is a cell, okay? That's, say, for example, a muscle cell or any cell of your body. So inside the cell, this glucose is broken down into a lot of compounds, and obviously at each step there is an enzyme. You know, chemical reaction does not work without enzymes, so these enzymes are working and glucose is converting into molecules. Ultimately we get a molecule which is known as acetyl-CoA, and this acetyl-CoA then enters into an organelle which is known as mitochondria. Okay, it enters into mitochondria. Now, all this was happening in the cytoplasm. This is all the cytoplasm. So, glucose enters into the cell. In the cytoplasm, it is converted into acetyl-CoA, and then acetyl-CoA gets into mitochondria. And now in mitochondria, this acetyl-CoA again is converted into something, which is converted into something, which is converted into something, and the cycle keeps on going, right? Now, these two different cycles, so that was cycle number 1, and this is cycle number 2. So let me tell you, the cycle number 1 is taking place inside the cytoplasm. Cycle number 2 is taking place inside the mitochondria. Okay, and now cycle number 1 has a name. It is known as glycolysis. Now, why it is called glycolysis? Because glucose is broken down. Glyco means glucose, lysis means breaking down. So glucose is breaking down into acetyl-CoA, and this cycle number 2 has a name as well. It is known as Krebs cycle. Okay, now listen carefully. This cycle, when the glucose is converted from one molecule to the other, to the other, to the other, and ultimately to acetyl-CoA, it produces energy. But it produces only a few molecules of energy. Only few molecules, okay? So less energy. It produces very low amount of energy. But once the acetyl-CoA gets into the mitochondria, here in the mitochondria, we have one master molecule. And you know what is that master molecule? First master molecule was the glucose, which enters into the cell. The second master molecule which enters is the oxygen. In the very beginning I told you, oxygen and glucose are involved in respiration. So oxygen enters, and this oxygen gets into the mitochondria. Now the mitochondria contains this master molecule, oxygen. Now this oxygen, listen to this very carefully. Now this oxygen is used in Krebs cycle. Okay, and what happens that Krebs cycle in the presence of oxygen produces hell amount of ADP molecules, a lot of ADP molecules, a lot of ADP molecules, ADP everywhere. Okay, a lot of ADP molecules. Now huge number of ADP molecules, but this reaction is dependent on what? On oxygen. If oxygen is not there, Krebs cycle will not happen. So let me summarize this for you. Once glucose enters in the cell, it is converted in the cytoplasm after a series of reaction into acetyl-CoA, which then enters into mitochondria, and it starts another cycle which is known as Krebs cycle. Krebs cycle can only happen and produce a lot of energy in the presence of oxygen, right? Now listen to this. Listen to this very carefully. The first part of glucose metabolism, which is called glycolysis, is producing only a few very small amount of ATP. But if it is completed inside the mitochondria, it produces a lot of ATP. But for that we need oxygen. So keep this in mind, and now let's start discussing this. So aerobic respiration is the respiration which happens in the presence of oxygen. So if you look at the equation, it is glucose plus oxygen, and obviously there are a lot of enzymes. We produce carbon dioxide and water and energy, and this energy is in the form of what? ATP. ATP is the molecule, right? So when I say aerobic respiration, it means this complete step, including glycolysis as well as Krebs cycle. So once both these things happen, this is called aerobic respiration, because it is requiring oxygen. So what's happening is there is glucose. I told you there is glucose entering in the cell. Then there is oxygen. I told you there is oxygen entering into the cell, and then they combine together and produce a lot of energy. Okay, this is called aerobic respiration because it utilizes oxygen. So the word aerobic basically means oxygen is needed. The food molecules are combined with oxygen. All food molecules contain carbon, hydrogen, and through the process of oxidation they produce carbon dioxide and water, and ultimately a lot of energy. And this is the balanced chemical, and exactly this is the amount of energy that we get. Obviously the molecule ATP is the name of the molecule, but how much energy it produces, that the unit of energy is kilojoule. So it is 2830 kilojoule. That's a huge amount of energy. Okay, but it always requires oxygen. All right, now leaving the experiments, I'm now jumping onto the concept of anaerobic respiration. Okay, now anaerobic respiration is something where a relatively small amount of energy is produced, and it happens without oxygen. Now listen to this very carefully. Now suppose this is the muscle cell, right? This is what I told you in the very beginning. This is the muscle cell, and the person is exercising. He's contracting and relaxing the muscle a lot. He's in the gym, he's running, he's swimming, so whatever he's doing, but a lot of exercise. Now because of the exercise, the amount of oxygen which is delivered is not enough. So what happens, that this system is not effectively working because there is not enough oxygen. Because when you exercise, you have like hyper breathing, your inspiratory rate and your expiratory rate, they go high, and then you are not getting enough oxygen because you demand more oxygen, you need more oxygen, but the oxygen you are getting in is not enough, is not equivalent to what you demand. So what happens as a result is that this system is not efficiently working, but this system is still working. This system does not require oxygen, guys. So because this system does not require oxygen, this is still working and it is still producing energy. So you are still producing energy but without oxygen, because this system requires oxygen, this system doesn't. Glycolysis does not require oxygen. So in the absence of oxygen, or if the oxygen levels are low, you are not producing very high amount of energy because this system is not working, but you are still producing some amount of energy. So now read this. Anaerobic respiration releases a relatively small amount of energy, and it can happen without oxygen. So one example is when you are exercising. Okay, so the word anaerobic means absence of oxygen. You still get energy from the food by the glycolysis pathway. Okay, a common example is the reaction of yeast, of sugar. So that experiments we are not discussing, but right now only glucose is used and you get carbon dioxide and energy, but this amount of energy is very less. It's very less. One more thing, last thing, and then you are done. And that thing is, now I told you this system is not working. So what will happen, that glucose will be converted still into acetyl CoA, but now this acetyl CoA is not going into the mitochondria because the system is not working, it's kind of shut off. So what will happen, that as a result of glycolysis, a new molecule will be produced which is known as lactic acid. So this system will now produce lactic acid, and this why is the system producing lactic acid? Because otherwise the acetyl CoA would have gone into the mitochondria, but now it's not going into the mitochondria, so it has to be converted to something. So after a series of reaction, it is converted into lactic acid, which causes muscle pain, and that's why when you exercise you get muscle pain, because there is accumulation of lactic acid. So this is the event, sequence of event. You exercise, you get deficient in oxygen, you start doing anaerobic respiration, and then you start producing lactic acid. Okay, so that's the thing that you must understand, the process, and that ethanol making is kind of lactic acid. Okay, right, but that's happening in the yeast, and I'm not going to discuss the experiment right now. Okay, but remember, glucose is converted into lactic acid once you do anaerobic respiration. So when anaerobic respiration also happens in muscles during vigorous exercise, because oxygen cannot be delivered fast enough, the muscle cell start to respire anaerobically. ये गलत लिखा हुआ है, this is wrong, not aerobically, anaerobically. They start to respire anaerobically. Okay, and they start producing lactic acid. Now anaerobic respiration is much less efficient, I told you, and that's something that I told you in the very beginning. If this is the only thing happening, glycolysis, you produce ATP but in low amounts. Okay, so it is less efficient, and see the amount of oxygen, the amount of energy that you get in the absence of oxygen, that's about 118 kilojoules. So very small amount as compared to what we get in thousands when there is oxygen. Okay, now during vigorous exercise, lactic acid may build up in the muscle, and it actually causes pain, and this is what is written over here. The blood needs to move quickly during and after the exercise to maintain this lactic acid level, otherwise it will cause pain. This produces carbon dioxide and water, which is anyways produced in respiration, either it's aerobic or anaerobic. After exercise, has stopped, a high level of oxygen consumption may continue until the excess lactic acid has been broken down. So obviously the lactic acid which is produced does not live in the muscle for the rest of your life. It is taken away, it is it is broken down, and then therefore the pain which you start feeling ultimately goes away. The buildup of lactic acid that is oxidized later is known as oxygen debt. An alternative term for this excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, EPOC, is the amount of oxygen needed to return to the body to its normal. So what happens basically, if the muscle is exercising, during the exercise there was deficient oxygen, but once you rest, now there is a lot of oxygen there. So this lot of oxygen coming in there is what is known as excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. So after exercise you start consuming high amount of oxygen. Okay, EPOC is the amount of oxygen needed to return to body to its normal. It is important because buildup of lactic acid in the muscle is the result of muscle fatigue, and it may lead to cramp. But luckily what happens when you exercise, then you rest. So when you rest, there is a lot of oxygen available, and lactic acid is then broken down and it gets away out of your body. Okay, so guys, this is what I had to discuss today. So what we did, let me scroll through the pages once again. We talked about number one, the concept of respiration. Then we talked about aerobic respiration, which is in the presence of oxygen. Then we talked about anaerobic respiration, which is in the absence of oxygen. And then I tried to give you the collaboration between your respiratory system, your digestive system, and your circulatory system. And then we talked about these beautiful funny diagrams, if you can understand them. So all the very best, and I will see you again in another video very soon. Take care of yourself.